as Rob said, this is an opportunity really just to share a little bit of what I've learned over the last almost 4 years now, having made the jump from a corporate career into going out on my own in consulting. And I will talk very briefly about HR consulting, but just to set up what I'm going to talk about the rest of the way. And I apologize if there's background noise. We've got an elementary school across the street. We got trolleys going by. It's like living in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood here. So if it gets distracting, I apologize for that. But I called this a leap of faith because it really is. Anybody who's thinking of making that jump, it really is, first and foremost, kind of scary because you don't have that security blanket such that it is nowadays of a paycheck every 2 weeks, benefits, and all the things that we rely on our employers for. And so it's kind of that initial leap of let's do this. So I want to talk about kind of just my personal experience with that, and then just kind of go over some lessons that I've learned. So our topics today, I'll just give you a real brief intro on myself so you have a little bit of context on my background. These sound like Jeopardy categories. Are you crazy? What is HR consulting? And again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but I think it's important to set up the rest of it just to show if you're thinking about going out on your own and you want to do that, you need to identify what's your niche going to be, what's your focus going to be. So for me, it was HR, but it's more than HR consulting. That's why I wanted to share that with you. You need to ask yourself, is consulting for me? And then we'll get into 10 lessons learned. And if anyone has any questions at the end, we can certainly take them, or reach out to me individually after the fact if you have specific questions about it. I often find myself talking to folks who have decided to go out on their own and want to just talk a little bit. So first, someone's messing with me here. Who put that picture up here? That's not me. There we go. So just the background, I'm not going to go through it all, but just so you get a sense of, I've kind of done a little bit of everything in this space that I'm in. And I think that's important when you try to establish your credentials and your bona fides as a consultant. People are going to want to know, well, have you been there? Have you done that? So I did spend a good bit of time in private practice, practicing labor and employment law on the management side, both in California, which is important for me right now, and Philadelphia. Moved in-house at AstraZeneca, where I was their employment counsel, and then created an employment practices group there, which really was within the HR function, but focused on things like discipline, performance, harassment, training, investigations, all that kind of work. We kind of jokingly called it the dark side of HR, but it's what I like. So I don't know what that says about me. Moved into a general counsel and VP of HR role. And then from there, moved on to just kind of a series of HR leadership roles at a variety of organizations, where I was kind of tasked with either creating an HR function or rebuilding it in the image of the organization to really try to align it with the strategic objectives of the organization. And I've also been on the faculty at Villanova in their master's program for over 20 years now, where I teach employment law and foundations of strategic HR management in the HRD master's program at Villanova. So that's kind of a nutshell of where I was, and that leads me to kind of where I am now. And when you first think about this and the idea of going out on your own, there's a few questions and a few things that kind of come to mind. First being, well, you already have a job, right? And in a lot of cases, you don't necessarily. And in some cases, that's what drives you to go out on your own, because you don't have another option. But if you do already have a job, why would you risk that security? Where are you going to get business? People aren't just going to start lining up at your door and trying to pay you money. And what happens if you fail? And these are all, very legitimate questions to ask. And they're just the questions I asked myself. They're not even the things that other people asked me. So that was kind of the first things to chew on a little bit before making the decision. Is this something I want to do? Is this something that makes sense? There's a lot to think about financially, security wise. Where are you in your life in terms of kids, college, house, all those things? Is it the right time to do it? Only you know that. But I'll tell you, after almost 4 years, it'll be 4 years next month. It's been incredibly rewarding, and personally, I couldn't imagine going back to a quote, corporate job at this point. I don't know how I would do it. Um, so really quick, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this because probably most of you don't care what is HR consulting, but the purpose of it is, and it's leading me to this kind of analysis we need to go through when we decide, do we want to go into consulting? First of all, identify what it's going to be that you're doing. If it's financial, if it's being a fractional CFO or marketing, whatever it might be, do some research, understand what it is that you're thinking about jumping into, identify it. I pulled this up to kind of give a definition of what do we mean when we say HR consulting. And it's not bad, it's not perfect, but it's not a bad definition. And you can do this for whatever area you decide you want to go in, whatever your specialty, your career path has been in beyond. And then do some research on the numbers. The HR consulting in the US is a $25 billion business with almost 47,000 HR consultants out there. So I figure I could take a small slice of 25 billion and still do okay for myself. So, seems like it made sense in that regard. But these are the important things that you need to understand for, again, whatever area is your specialty. So again, you also need to focus, because just saying, in my case, I'm an HR consultant could mean anything. And all of these things up here, it's very easy for out of work HR people to just create a website, throw up a name, get an LLC and say, I'm an HR consultant, hire me. What does that mean? So again, regardless of what area you're going into, what your specialty is, understand what it is in the big picture and understand what it is for you. What's your niche? What's your specialty? You're going to do all of this? You're going to be a jack of all trades? I mean, I can clearly do all of these things on here. Having been, chief people officer, VP of HR, I can do it all. Do I want to? Not necessarily. Do I want to hold myself out as an expert that these are the things I offer? Not really. But if a client hires me to do an investigation or to redesign their HR function or to do an assessment of their function, and they need some of this other stuff too, I'm happy to do it. It's just, you've got to decide what your focus is going to be when you decide to go out there and making that decision, answering this question, is it for me? It's not for everyone. It's tough. And we have a support group. We jokingly say a support group of people who have gone out on our own, and it's always that kind of nagging fear of, am I going to have work next week? You could be really busy this week, and then if you're like me and you're not used to taking a lot of risks, you're always wondering, 3 months from now, 6 months from now, are people still going to be calling? Will I still have work to do? And if you can't handle that, if that's not your personality, then maybe it's not something for you. If you need something that's a little bit more stable. Again, when we read every day about the thousands and thousands of layoffs every day, I'm not sure about that stability part, but at least I know I'm controlling my own destiny in that regard. If I don't get any work and I don't bring in any money, it's nobody's fault but my own. It's not somebody deciding that I'm no longer necessary for them. But it really is a leap of faith, because you're having faith in yourself. You're having faith in your ability to do what you need to do. And you're putting yourself out there and you're taking a risk in doing it. So, as I mentioned earlier, you need to kind of focus. You need to understand when you make that decision to do it, what is the niche that you're going to be? What is your value proposition? How are you going to differentiate yourself from, what did I say, 49,000 or however many HR consultants are out there? What makes me different? That's the questions you need to ask, because that's what clients and potential clients are going to want to know. So what's your value proposition? Identify the niche or the focus that you're going to fall within, and what's going to differentiate you from others. And if you see on this, I included just this in here just to show you how I approached it. And it's really focusing on these 4 areas on the middle screen there. Those are the things that I'm going to really put myself out there as wanting to be known for. And again, as I said, I'll do anything related to HR. And in employment law as well. I'm still licensed, active in Pennsylvania and California. So I can do things that are legal, but I don't put myself out there as a law firm or practicing law. Although, as a lot of you know, there's a gray area between, a lot of HR things and the practice of law. But I tried to focus, and we always hear the elevator speech, and that's kind of an old, worn out chestnut, but it makes sense if you kind of repackage it a little bit. And here's the way I like to look at it. Imagine you're coming out of an office on the 10th floor of a building, and somebody gets on the elevator with you to ride down to the lobby, and they look at you and say, "Oh, what do you do?" You got 10 floors to tell them what you do. Let's assume no stops. It's an express. You've got 10 floors to tell them what you do. And what are you going to tell them? How are you going to explain what you do? If you just kind of stumble around and say, I'm a consultant, that's not necessarily going to help you too much. So it becomes more of a, let's practice this, let's rehearse it, let's get it down so I can very clearly and lucidly tell somebody in a matter of a couple minutes, here's what I do. And they walk away saying, oh, if I need somebody to do a workplace investigation, I know who to call. If I need somebody to do harassment prevention training, I've got somebody I can talk to. That's what you want them to walk away from after having that discussion. All right. So 10 lessons learned. What I tried to do here was to come up with some thoughts of, in the sense of, the last 4 years, what have I learned? What have I figured out? There goes a trolley, if you can hear it. I don't know. Okay. What have I figured out in the last 4 years? And one of the things is I'm not, you can't control certain things. And regardless of how well you plan or how well you intend things to go, don't necessarily know what's going to happen around the corner. For example, December 2019, I decided I'm going to do this. January 2020 is when I launched it. We all know what happened almost immediately after that, right? And I couldn't control that. I didn't have anything to do with COVID happening, but trust me when I say it was not the best time to launch a new venture with basically the world shutting down. But that's okay. We persevered. We made it through. We pivoted a little bit, did a lot of webinars and things on how companies should respond to COVID and the laws that, as you remember, were probably changing every week, it seemed, on how to deal with it. So we dealt with it. We figured out a way. That's the royal way because it's just me, but it sounds better. Figured out a way to get through it, and we did. So what did I learn in this 3-4 years of doing this? The first is you've got to believe in yourself. First and foremost, as I said, it's a leap of faith, and a big part of that faith is believing in yourself, because you've got to have enough confidence and a little bit of cockiness internally to know that you've got what it takes. We've got a lot of imposter syndrome sneaking in here, where you're not sure. Can I really do this? Am I an expert, and am I somebody that people are going to pay money to hear from? You got to push that out of your head. You got to believe in yourself. You got to have, like I said, a little bit of that inner cockiness to say, yeah, I can do this. I know what I'm doing. I'm an expert in this field. I believe in myself, and that's going to carry over to what people see in you and the confidence that they see in you when you go talk to them. Second lesson, jump in with both feet. A lot of times what I've seen is people will be out of work, laid off, say, I'm looking for a job, but I'm also going to start this consulting thing on the side, and I'm kind of going to dabble in that a little bit as well. And yeah, you can do that, but you're not going to really succeed fully as a consulting organization if you're not all in. If you're not fully committed to this, it's just going to be kind of a side thing. And if that's all you need, that's fine. But if you really want to make this a successful business that will take you into the future for a lot of years, you got to jump in with both feet. You've got to say, I am fully committed to this. I'm not going to look for work. I'm not going to be applying for jobs and going on interviews at the same time I'm trying to get this started. It's got to be all in. If you make that decision, I'm going to give it a shot. Give yourself a time frame. Say, I'm going to try it for a year. I'm going to try it for 2 years, whatever it might be. Um, you know, a month probably isn't the best idea because it takes some time to ramp up. But jump in with both feet. Understand that you've got to make a commitment to this, and that this needs to be something that you really are serious about as a full-time thing. Number three, you can't be afraid to fail. Um, there's going to be failure. It's going to be a part of this. Um, it's never going to be all butterflies and rainbows. There's going to be slow times. There's going to be down times. There's going to be times when you question, did I make the right decision? Um, you know, is this the right thing for me to do? Um, but you've got to understand that failure is a part of success ultimately. And, I always talk about baseball and everything I do. And I always say the people that are in the Hall of Fame in the major leagues failed 7 times out of every 10. So you can't let that stop you. You just got to pick yourself up, move on, and keep trying. Keep trying. If it doesn't work, try something different, but don't just give up, because it takes perseverance. It takes gutting it through the tough times, getting it through the slow months, getting it through the global pandemics, whatever it might be. But you've got to try, and you've got to keep persevering and um, keep that engine running and that motor running. Fourth is building an identity and a brand. As I said kind of earlier, it really does come down to I'm messed up with my slides here, and I lost everybody's faces, and I get all confused when I'm just looking at the screen and I can't see who I'm talking to. So that's why I look like I don't know what I'm doing here. But building the identity and the brand, understanding that you've figured out what your niche is going to be. You've come up with that elevator speech that you can explain to people very clearly and coherently what you do in a short period of time, and you understand where you're going with it. Then stay in that wheelhouse. Don't try to be a jack of all trades or a Jill of all trades and do everything for everybody. If you put yourself out there as, yeah, I can do that, I can do that, you're going to wear yourself too thin, and you're not going to really get that reputation as an expert in a certain area. And as I said earlier, if you want to, add services for clients that ask you to, that's totally fine. Once they're in the door and you've done what they initially brought you in for, retained you for, absolutely do whatever they need to do as long as you can handle it. But understand that you need to build that identity and brand. And again, with me, it's really focusing on workplace investigations and training, and beyond that, designing HR functions, helping do assessments of existing HR functions, and then just being kind of supplemental HR support at a high level for smaller organizations where it doesn't make sense for them to hire, a full-time HR VP or someone with the kind of background or experience I have. They can charge, or they can have my guidance and counsel for a fixed monthly fee when they need it. So that's kind of the 4 things that I just say, that's what I do. You need something else? Fine, we'll do it. We need to do a comp analysis or something like that. Leadership development, sure. We can do that, but we're not going to focus on that. The 5th is network, network, network. So, and Beacon didn't pay me to put this slide in there. But yeah, I mean, it's so critical. It really is a long play. It's building a successful consulting business doesn't happen overnight, and you need to understand that the way this will be built is by meeting more people, connecting with people, getting your name out there, and just depending on the services you offer and what you are offering to people, it's not like selling something that somebody looks at it and says, oh, that's great, I want to buy it. In my circumstances, if it's workplace investigations, you're not going to call me unless something happens and somebody makes a complaint and all of a sudden you've got a sexual harassment situation and you need an investigation tomorrow. I understand that. So the sales cycle for something like that is much more about the long play, about building relationships, about making sure I'm top of mind when people have a need, because when it comes up, they need somebody quickly, and I want them to think of me when they need that. So it's very different from certain other businesses where there's a need there all the time, and you can just go out and try to sell to it. Um, in a lot of consulting, it is a long play, but the more people you connect with, the more people you can meet, get your name out there, speak at events like this, just get to know people. And then somebody knows somebody who needs what you do. Word gets out there. You get in networking groups, you get active on LinkedIn, and your name starts to be synonymous with the type of work you do. And that's really the best, I think, that you can hope for, because then you're really successful in building a reputation in the area that you are trying to establish yourself in. Know your value. One of the more difficult things that I've found when I started out was, how do you price? How do you price your work? And part of it's that imposter syndrome to some extent, but it's also a little bit about kind of understanding that to clients, you do hold an immense amount of value with what you're offering them. And you can't look at it as, well, is an hour of my time or is 2 hours of my time really worth X dollars? That's not the way to look at it. What you need to look at it is, what are you accomplishing on their behalf? What value or service are you bringing to them, regardless of how long it takes you? Are you giving them training that they need to really help educate their employees and their managers on what a respectful workplace culture looks like? That's invaluable in the sense that if it stops lawsuits or litigations or people leaving because it's a bad culture, you can't put a price tag on that. So you got to look at what is the value of your services and price accordingly for that. Try to separate it from the personal finance mindset. That's something that I've had a problem with getting started. You think of your home budget and how much it costs you to do certain things, and you think, well, I don't want to spend that. $10,000 is a lot of money. You got to separate it from that personal finance, move it to the business finance, and think, these are organizations that are spending this money and have budgets for these things. Put it in that context and understand from their perspective, what's the value to them. And as Bernard Hopkins says in this quote, if you don't know your own value, somebody will tell it to you, and it's guaranteed to be less than what you're really worth. So don't let other people set your value. You establish it. Again, that little bit of inner cockiness is important in this regard. And again, cockiness isn't the right word, but it's really more aggressive confidence, maybe. Um, don't undervalue yourself. Don't go in as the Walmart of consultants, because then you'll just get used and abused, and you'll never be able to get your fees up to where they need to be. If you're good at what you do and you know it, then you charge accordingly, and your work will speak for itself, and your reputation will speak for itself. All right, number 7, and this is so important: be responsive and proactive. Anytime you have a lead, you have a client, you have somebody reach out to you, always shoot for world-class service. Get back to them immediately. Be responsive. I have a rule where if I'm doing an investigation or any other project for a client, I never want them to reach out to me and say, can you give me a status report? Where are we? It's kind of a failure to me if that happens, because I don't want them to ever feel that they have to do that. I want to tell them, here's where we are, here's what's going on. Let them know that they're top of mind, they're number one interest for me, and I'm taking their situation very seriously. They should all feel like your most important client. They're paying you. They're not doing you a favor. So you bend over backwards to make sure that they're treated the way they should be. And at least that's the approach I take. And every client gets absolute personal service and is made to feel that they are the most important client I have, because they are. Everyone is. Without them, you don't have a business. So be responsive. Don't make them call you and chase you down. Get back to them immediately, even if it's, they send you an email saying what's going on. Respond and say, I'm booked up all day today. Got your email. Let's try to talk tomorrow, or whatever it might be. I often send emails to clients really, really late at night because that's when I tend to get productive. And I'll send them something saying, I was tied up all day in investigations or in training, but I wanted to get back to you on your question today and let you know here's where we are, or here's an update on the status of the situation. Wanted to make sure I got this to you before the morning, things like that. But just let them know. And they really appreciate that. They really appreciate being thought of and not having to track you down and say, what's going on with this project? Where are we? Are we on, are we meeting our time frames, whatever it might be. Number 8, as George Costanza has taught us, make yourself indispensable. Consultants are often, some of the first things cut in organizations when there are budget issues or financial challenges or pressures. You've got to create your own value. If someone's looking at their financials and says, what is this X amount a month we're paying to this consultant? What are we getting from this? You want somebody to immediately jump up and say, we got to have that. We can't let that go because that is so important to us because XYZ. And you've got to create that value. No one's going to do it for you. But if you do great work, you anticipate the client's needs, you give them ideas, you talk about what other things you might be able to help them with, you think about ways that you can help their business and make them more available, more able to do their jobs and not focus on whatever talent you bring. They're going to really find you indispensable, and never give them a product that you say is good enough. It's good enough. It used to be Avis or somebody that used to have that good enough isn't slogan. And I think that's so true. I mean, I can do an investigation report and spend hours on it. Those things take forever to do. And they get really exhausting, and you get bleary-eyed writing them and rewriting them. And you could finally come to the point where you say, well, you know what, it's good enough. But once you do that, you might as well just shut it down because you're mailing it in at that point. You never want it to be good enough. You always have to shoot for being as good as it can possibly be so that you're incredibly proud of the work that you do. But creating that value for yourself, if you're indispensable, they're not going to let you go, and they're going to fight for you regardless of the financial challenges because you bring such value that they otherwise don't have within the organization, which is why they need you. Checking in regularly with former clients and leads, especially with what I do, doing investigations and training. Often it's not a repeat business. Somebody will have a sexual harassment complaint. They'll need an investigation immediately, and then they're done with me. They don't necessarily need me again. But I still always calendar, at least quarterly, to just send an email to everybody I've ever worked with and just say, hey, checking in. Haven't talked to you in a while. Hope everything's going well for you over there. I'm here if you ever need anything. Have a great holiday, whatever it might be. And I usually try to time it around holiday season, summer, whatever, so I can throw that in there. Have a great summer, enjoy it, whatever. And more often than not, a week, 2 weeks, a month later, I'll hear from that person and say, you know what, I got your email and it made me think that we could really use XYZ from you. And that's not going to happen all the time, but it's good to let them know that you still care. It's good to let them know that you're checking in on them, that you haven't forgotten about them. And the benefit to you can potentially be they reach out and have more business for you. You wouldn't know that if you didn't check in. And so many times I've learned that, leads that I thought were going to be valuable and turn into something good and then kind of fizzled out. If you stay with it, sometimes it's just the business cycle for them. Sometimes it's just slow. Don't give up. There's one client I chased, and when I say chased, it was just, checking in with them like this every couple of months. And it was probably 8 or 9 months later that they finally said, you know what, we're so glad that you've kept checking in with us because we're ready to move forward with that project now. And had I just stopped when they said, our budget's changed, we can't do this right now, wouldn't have gotten that work. But by checking in regularly in an appropriate, professional, friendly way and not pestering them for work, that turned into a big job that they were finally ready to handle. So it's just staying on their radar and letting them know that you are aware of them and they're important to you. And then number 10, stay hungry, never get complacent. You always have to keep hustling with an eye to the future. We don't have the luxury of resting on our laurels because, it's what have you done for me lately? And you might have had a great year. It's December in a couple of weeks. 2023 might have been a really good year, but what's 2024 going to hold? And, one of the biggest challenges, I didn't put it in here as a lesson learned, but I think one of the biggest challenges to overcome and to deal with if you're out on your own as a consultant is that you're everything. Your business development, your delivery, service delivery, your back office, you're writing the proposals, you're doing the marketing, you're trying to get out there and speak and meet people. You're also doing the work when it comes in. You're doing all the billing for it. You're trying to stay networked with people. You're following people up when they haven't paid their invoices. Unless you've gotten to the point where you can bring in some help or even, bring in, an administrative assistant on a kind of fractional basis, you've got to do all that yourself. And it can get overwhelming. I know it has for me, for sure. And you've got to always kind of keep the future in mind and say, well, right now I might have 3 investigations that are keeping me insanely busy, but what's January and February going to look like? I've got to make sure I'm reaching out to people. I'm putting things on LinkedIn. Again, I'm not going to necessarily go out and get business because business happens in my world when it happens, but I've got to keep hustling and it seems to work. We can't just say, well, this has been a great year, I'm just going to sit back and relax and it'll continue to be that way. It's not going to be like that unless we make it that way, unless we make that decision to put the effort into it that we need to. So that's the 10 lessons I came up with. Happy to answer any questions if we have any. Otherwise, that's what I got. I'm gonna figure out how to get the picture back of people.
I do have a couple of questions. Are you trying to just go?
Well, I'm curious, what made you decide
Sorry.
you even wanted to do this go out on your own in the first place?
The last several jobs that I held, I kind of jokingly referred to them as HR rescue jobs, where I would go into an organization and kind of start from scratch and do a strong assessment of their HR function and then break it down and rebuild it from the start. And I just got to the point where I said, this isn't really what I want to be doing. I got to the point where my kids were both out of college and it seemed like, as good a time as any to make a change if that's what I wanted to do. And I thought really hard about what is it that really makes me feel fulfilled and happy. And what I realized was it's really doing investigations and training and kind of high level support for HR. So that's what made me say, this is as good a time as any for me. I'm going to just reach out and start making some contacts with people that I know and see if this makes sense. And the time worked out well. Other times that I would have loved to do that, it just wasn't right. Too many bills to pay, too much going on. But this was the right time, and fortunately, it was worked out.
Keith, you had obviously the slides up talking about the 10 lessons that you learned,
Mhm.
and this is going to catch you, sort of off the cuff, if you will. But if you were to say, I won't make up 10, but if you were to say like 3 ways that my life is different since I've been doing my own consulting, what might they be for you? It's sort of along the lines of John's question of, what prompted you to do this when you did it, but
Yeah.
how is your life different today in terms of, I'll say, your professional life different today versus when you're in a more corporate role?
Well, the biggest thing I think is just, complete freedom with schedule. I don't have to worry about sick days or vacation days, or, do I have to be there at 8:30? Is somebody going to be wondering where I am or why I'm leaving at 6? None of that matters anymore at all. I've got nobody to answer to, and that's good and bad, right? Because, the downside of it is I'm responsible for myself completely that way too. But that's what I meant earlier too, when I said I can't imagine going back to, you know, I've got to be at this. I used to drive sometimes an hour, hour and a half each way to work for my last job. And I go by, I got a little office now about 10 minutes from my house just because my wife can't stand having me there 5 days a week. So, it's 10 minutes away. I drive over the Blue Route and I just shake my head every day thinking, I can't imagine being in that every day and going back to that every single day and dealing with the politics and kind of all the corporate stuff that you got to deal with. And so I think that's the biggest thing is just the flexibility and freedom to do what you want when you want. I mean, you've got to have the discipline and the responsibility to understand that when your clients have needs, that's gonna, you got to drop everything and do that. But otherwise, you're really on your own to do what you want.
Chase has his hand raised.
Hey, Keith, thanks so much for coming to speak to us today here, Beacon. Certainly really appreciate hearing your perspective. Question for you. What are you seeing as the biggest challenge right now for filling that pipeline of clients for yourself?
I think it's just fortunately, and knock on wood when I say it, I haven't had that issue. Every time I've said, I'm going to take a little breather now for a couple weeks, all of a sudden somebody will call and say, hey, we've got this harassment issue. I don't do any marketing. I don't do any business development in a formal sense whatsoever. I post a lot on LinkedIn, as some of you know that I know on here, but it's never about my work. It's never about, hey, do you need an investigation? Call me. It's more to keep my name out there and to establish just kind of a brand. So because of that, and because of, I think, the enormous amount of networking I've done over the years and kept with it, I don't really have that issue with pipeline. I mean, I get calls, for investigations, I'll mostly get calls from law firms who have clients who need an investigation, or from chief people officers or CEOs or CFOs directly who need it done. And, fortunately, word of mouth is huge. People like Miriam and Tom on the call here have been great in introducing me to people. And, because of that, it hasn't really been a challenge. That said, as I mentioned earlier, it keeps me up every night, still wondering, 2 months from now, 3 months from now, am I gonna have work to do? I think it's just natural. And if you don't have that fear, you probably have something wrong with you, because it's just natural. You've got to always worry about, you eat what you kill, kind of. But yeah, that's, if I had to do a lot more marketing and actual business development, I'm not sure how I would do it, because I'm so busy actually getting the service delivery piece done. Other thoughts? I wish I could have read all the comments in there when I was talking, but
Looks like Mike has his hand up. Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Hey, Keith, how you doing?
Hey, Mike, how are you?
Good. I really enjoyed your presentation. Your journey aligns very closely with my own. I got into business for myself around 2007, 2008, which, if I remember, like,
Not a
didn't
great
the stock market bottom out around that time?
Yeah.
But I think you win with you get the first prize for going into business around COVID. So I'm just curious, with all the excitement and all your aspirations and dreams, and then to have something like that slam the door on you. I mean, how did you not just say, well, I guess the universe has spoken and maybe I shouldn't do this? Like, how did you persevere through an incredibly challenging moment in your life?
Yeah, that's a great question. And partially because I didn't have another choice. I quit my job. So it was either try to find a job in the middle of the beginning of a global pandemic, at a high-end HR leadership role, or just stick with it. And I'd spent January, pretty much all of January and February, fortunately, it turns out, going to breakfast, lunch, and dinner practically every day with people that I had known from the past, either from my law firm career or HR career over the years, and just rebuilding those relationships. So by the time COVID actually hit and shut everything down, I had at least had a couple months in of really getting some aggressive networking in person out there. And then again, the ability, based on the legal background, the ability to kind of pivot a little bit. And I did a lot of work with Vicky Sack and Michael at Juno when they were having their HR at home, they called it, and we did a kind of weekly. Some of you might have been on that, I don't know, but they did a weekly during Zoom, just to keep people connected. And I did a legal update for that just every week on what's changed. How do we deal with COVID issues in the workplace? What are our responsibilities as employers? So while that wasn't by any means what I had set out to do or planned to do for this business, it was a way to at least still start to build the brand and keep my name out there. And obviously they were all just free webinars. I wasn't getting any revenue out of them, but they paid off in the long term because, like I said, it's the long game, and you build relationships. And I've had a lot of people over the years say, "Hey, I remember you from those HR at home webinars. They were really helpful." So it's that kind of thing. But honestly, Mike, I didn't have much of a choice at that point. I was all in, and it probably would have taken a few months at the least to try to get another job. And who was hiring right then anyway? So. Gutted it out, and fortunately it worked out for the best. But yeah, you're pretty close with your timing as well. I always tell people, don't come to me for advice on where the market's going. I'm not good on that one. Any other questions?
Keith, you touched on a couple minutes ago about how a lot of the referrals you get come from law firms. And I wonder if maybe you could just elaborate on or sort of extrapolate that to other types of consulting and sort of like building those partnerships, referral networks, or
Yeah,
sounds like you do a
absolutely.
lot of networking. So how did you go about doing that?
Yeah, and that's a great point because we need to look at laterals, right, as sources of business for us. Again, whether we're in finance, IT, marketing, whatever it might be, what are some sources of business that you could go to other than the traditional go straight to the chief financial officer because they need help? In my case, because workplace investigations are such a unique area, and law firms often don't want to do the workplace investigations for their clients because if they do, it's going to impact the attorney-client privilege. They want to bring in a third party to do it, but a third party who's not going to be another law firm that could potentially steal their clients. Lawyers are funny that way. So that's another advantage I have where I'm not a law firm. So I can go to Blank Rome or Littler, where I used to work, and other firms and say, hey, you need expert workplace investigation help. I can come in and do it. You're not going to have to worry about me taking your clients because I'm not interested in that. And then just start building those relationships. And you can translate that to any field that you want to go into. If it's tech, are there other areas where there's service providers in other areas that you could say, your clients might often need my services. It's not something you're going to provide to them. Let's get to know each other a little bit. I have a lot of kind of loose partnerships that, I don't get into diversity, equity, and inclusion work. I've done some of it. It's not something I would say I'm an expert at. Same with, executive comp analysis and plans. I can work my way around. I know enough to be dangerous, but I'm going to rely on partners that I work with who have their own firms that specialize in that. And that's also another benefit you can provide to your clients. If they trust you and they have a good relationship with you, and someone comes to me and says, hey, that training you did was awesome. We really appreciate that investigation work you did. Can you come in and do some leadership development training in DEI? I'll say, you know what? No, but I've got somebody who's really good that I trust that I would hire to do that. And now they don't have to go out and find someone. They don't need to do all of that legwork, and they trust me. So they're going to trust the person I bring to them. So that's more added value that I bring. I'm not seeing revenue from that, but long-term, it's cementing that relationship as a trusted advisor. So I think to your point, Zoe, just trying to understand what lateral partnerships you can make and what other non-traditional entry points into your client, build those relationships as well, speak as much as you can at different events. COVID's been really great in that regard for me, because I'm talking to HR groups all over the country, an hour here, an hour there, but every once in a while I'll get a call later from somebody who, I saw you 6 months ago talk about workplace investigations. We need one. Can you help? So, it wouldn't have necessarily been able to do that. And the other thing is probably 75% of my investigation work is in California right now. And California requires, if you do investigations, you have to be a member of the California bar to do it. You can't just, say, I'm going to go be a consultant in California and do investigations like you could in PA. So because of COVID and Zoom, that's a whole new area that's open to me that probably 5 years ago I wouldn't have access to, because they'd want someone local, because we would have all said at that time, you have to do an investigation in person. You can't do a Zoom investigation. Now it's standard. So you just have to kind of always keep an eye on what's changing, how you can take advantage of what's changing, how you can adapt and market yourself to those things that way. Any other questions?
Keith, just kind of a tactical one, and I'm not a consultant, haven't done what you've done, but you mentioned in your response to some other questions that, December of 19, you decided you're going to make the pivot. You left your job, and you talked about what happened with COVID, but the tactical question is more like, how much content did you have to prepare before you felt you're ready to do it? You do workplace investigations, you do the respectful workplace training. Did you have content that you had been sort of brought with you from your old life? Did you have to create new content? Did you feel like you had to get to a certain point before you were ready, or is it more as a client need comes up, you create content for the client? Again, it's in the weeds kind of a question, but I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's going to depend to some extent on what it is that you're going into, and what kind of content's required. Fortunately for me, over the years, I've created quite a bit of, investigation templates and scripts and training programs, that I was able to just very easily adapt to going out on my own, because there was all things I'd created in the past anyway. So I took a little time to build a basic website. Got my son to help me with that, because he's a website builder whiz, and he convinced me that really it just needs to be something that people can look at to see that you're real, and it doesn't need to be a whole lot more than that. So it's basic and it's clean, and it's tells people what I do. So I got that built. Had a few one-pagers put together. We don't walk around with folders anymore that we give people, like we used to, but now we email them PDFs of things. So I got some of that put together. And slowly built on that library of things. So when a client says, "Oh, well, I need somebody to help me with," we just got into executive search for HR and hospitality, because I didn't mention this. Things started to get so busy that I had to bring on some help. So I've got 2 contractors working for me, 1099 basis as needed, and that's been a huge help. Because I can just pay them when I have work that I can't get to. But one of the things we started was executive search for HR and hospitality, because one of the people I brought on board used to work for me when I was head of HR at Hersha Hospitality, and she's had her whole career in hospitality HR, and has a lot of clients, or a lot of contacts there. So we're capitalizing on that niche as well, and kind of venturing into that. It's not going to be our primary area, but when we meet people and she runs into people that we used to work with or come across in hospitality, we can say, "Oh yeah, we offer this now." So it's just evolving, and as you evolve, you build the materials and the creatives that you need to go along with it. And it's always good to have one-pagers that you can send to clients that are directly addressing their needs. One that maybe tells a little bit about you in one page. One that talks about the services. I have one that is client testimonials, because people like to see that. And you just kind of pick and choose what you send people when you meet them.
I think that's really smart, because I've seen a lot of people spend a lot of time putting collateral, putting lots of things together and delaying the actual getting out in front of people because, oh, I got to have all this stuff.
Right.
And it's much more important to get in front of people. And then, you develop the stuff you need as you do that.
Absolutely, John. Couldn't agree with that more. You could get so hung up on, let me get completely ready and then I'll do it. You'll never be there. Get out there and then create what you need when you need it. But most important is to get out there and start talking to people and getting business in. Yeah.
You mentioned, Keith, that you really don't do, I don't have your exact words, but you said you don't do a lot of marketing per se, but what you do and have done is a tremendous amount of networking. And I'm not, this is not a promo for Beacon per se, but clearly the value of an organization like Beacon and just the other professional relationships and contacts you've had, I mean, has been your marketing for you. You've managed those relationships, you've built off of them. Again, you've talked about how you would be doing a session like this, like you're doing today, out of the graciousness of yourself. And that comes back 3, 4, 5 months down the road to say, hey, I saw you on this Beacon session or this other session. I've got an issue. Can you help me? So that networking has really been a very viable form of marketing for you in many ways, would be my sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's probably been the most valuable marketing tool I've had. Is networking. I'm part of the Association of Workplace Investigators, which is a international now organization for people who do investigation work. And we just had our national meeting out in Scottsdale, and I did a sponsorship for that. So I gave out, materials, notebooks, pens, and paid a couple $1,000s to get my name out there, and got a lot of people who called and just said, hey, I met you at that conference. And groups like Beacon, been involved for a few years and then kind of got away from it when I got too busy. But, that it's just the more people you can meet, the more relationships you can build. And don't do it to build business, do it to build relationships, because if you do it to get business, it's not going to work. If you do it to build relationships, that's going to lead to creating trust in people. And then that's going to lead to business. So if you do it for the right reasons, networking to me has been, and I do so much where people will just call me and say, hey, can you give me advice on this, or can you help me with that, or review this? And I'm always happy to help, because, it'll come back to you eventually. It's karma, right? So you do good for somebody else, eventually they'll, one way or another, it'll be repaid to you. But if you go to set out to do it, to say, hey, I'm going to talk to this group today because I'm going to get business from it, that's not the approach to take, in my view.
Well, it's a great segue into our thanking you. You have been gracious enough to give us your time today and your expertise. It's been a great conversation, lots of good dialogue and discussions, and clearly value that you've added to all of us on the call today. And I'm just really appreciative, Keith, that you were willing to give up your time to do it. So thank you for that. And thank you for just a great conversation today and a great session. We appreciate it. And I'm sure everyone is walking away with something that they will take away and say, yeah, I remember that. It's a good reminder, or I hadn't thought of that, or whatever it may be. So we appreciate that. So thank you to all who attended today. We thank you for your time as well. It's always great to have the participants. And I hope you did walk away with some value today from that perspective. And
Beacon is the premier executive networking organization serving the Mid-Atlantic region. To learn more, go to beaconforlife.org.